This is the last thing that we're going to cover in Unit 2. And what we want to look at to end Unit 2, and this will start leading us into Unit 3, is how did the colonists begin to see themselves as American? So the British had created 13 colonies in North America, and how did those colonists go from seeing themselves as British citizens and subjects of the British Crown to seeing themselves as American and then starting the American Revolution and forming a new country? And there are three things that help lead to that. So we're going to look at how the colonists began to think and what changed in their thought process along the way. The first thing we want to look at is salutary neglect. So think about the word neglect and what you already know that it means. If you neglect something, that means that you're not paying it attention, that you're not thinking about it. And so that's what the British were doing to the colonies for a little while. They knew the colonies were there. They knew that they were trading with them and they were using them in the mercantilist system and they were making money off of them. But other than that, they were pretty loosely supervising the colonies. Up until the Navigation Act, that's really the only thing that the British passed that was even supervising the colonies. And so the salutary neglect basically meant that England is concerned with its own problems in England and not with what's going on in the colonies. And this was caused by something that happened in England in 1688 called the Glorious Revolution. And during the Glorious Revolution, Parliament became more powerful than the monarchy. So prior to 1688 in England, the king had all the power, but after 1688, Parliament began to have more and more power. And as part of the Glorious Revolution, the ideas of rights of Englishmen became important. What rights did you have as a British subject, as an English citizen? And so these ideas start to play in as the British are neglecting the colonies and focusing more on what was happening in England. The colonists are going to start governing themselves. So while there's all this debate in England between who has power, the Parliament or the king, in the colonies, it led to the colonies themselves creating more power. Instead of being ruled directly by officials that were appointed by the king, there were more legislatures that were elected, and so the colonies will start to self-govern. And this goes on for a while, and as you can tell, once the colonists get used to having their own power, when the British start to step back in and have more control, that's going to lead to conflict. So here's the meme to help you understand salutary neglect. You can see the king with his glasses on. I wear my sunglasses, so I can't see what those colonists over in America are up to, for now anyway. And then when he decides to take off his sunglasses, we know there's going to be problems, and that will lead to the Revolutionary War. The second thing that actually starts in Europe and then makes its way over to the colonies that helps persuade the Americans and start thinking of themselves as less British was the Enlightenment. You may remember the Enlightenment from your world history class. One of the main philosophers and leaders of the Enlightenment was a man named John Locke, and John Locke believed in natural rights. Natural rights were rights that were given to all human beings, no matter where that you lived at. They were given by God and they couldn't be taken away. And for John Locke, there were three natural rights: life, liberty, and property. It probably sounds familiar because Thomas Jefferson uses this idea when he writes the Declaration of Independence, but he changes it to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So the colonists were thinking about these ideas of natural rights, that they had life, they had liberty, they had property. And they also thought about what John Locke said in the social contract, that a social contract was between a people and its government, and that a people would give up some of their rights in order to get protection from their government. And so it was a two-way street, that the people had to do one part and the government had to do one part. And if one party broke the contract, then something else had to happen. And so for the colonists, they were giving up rights and they expected protection from the British government. Well, John Locke says that if the government is failing to perform its duties, then the people can overthrow it and form a new government. Well, the colonists start to feel like they're being exploited by the British. We start to see a little bit of that when we looked at the mercantilist system last week. We really start to see it when Britain starts raising taxes in the colonies. And so the people decide that the British government is not being fair to them. It's taking away their natural rights. And therefore, they are going to start thinking about what it would be like without the British government, that they can overthrow Britain and form their own government. And so we see the Enlightenment starting to place these ideas into the heads of the colonists. So here's another meme to show you that one does not simply take away someone's natural rights. That does not just happen. Natural rights cannot be taken away, and if a government is trying to take them away, then it is the right of the people to overthrow that government and form a new government. So the last thing that helps lead the colonists to thinking of themselves as American is a movement called the First Great Awakening. It's called the first one because there is a second one in the 1800s that we'll talk about later on. And this was a religious movement. It was a revival of the Christian faith, and it really helped to unite the colonies. So there were 13 different colonies. There were a lot of different people who lived in these colonies. We learned that the regions in the colonies were really different. And so the First Great Awakening helps to unite the colonies together as a unified force. It also increased the education levels in the colonies. So the Enlightenment was something that was led by very educated people. And so once colonists start to become more and more educated and they're learning about more and more of those ideas of the Enlightenment, it's going to lead to new thought processes in the colonies. So we're going to see universities that get established as part of the First Great Awakening. Harvard, Princeton, Yale are established. So the Puritans, again, are leading that drive for education and studying the Bible and learning more about religion. And Jonathan Edwards is going to be one of the main leaders of the First Great Awakening. He was a preacher. One of his famous sermons entitled Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. You can see an excerpt from it here. And he says, "The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider, abhors you, and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire." So you can see here in his rhetoric, he's using fear, and his main purpose is to get people to convert to Christianity, that they would repent of their sins and be saved. And the more people that we see coming to Christianity in the colonies, we see more unity in the colonies that helps lead to a unified American identity. So all three of these things are helping push towards what it means to be an American instead of being British. So what you're going to do with this information, this will help you as well to review for your Unit 2 quiz that's coming up on Friday, is we're going to do an activity called 6 Degrees of Separation. And 6 Degrees of Separation helps us see a change over time and how events lead to one another. So the main question that we're looking at is, how did the colonists begin to see themselves as American? So you can see the last event that you're going to have on your 6 Degrees of Separation is American identity. And your first event is Jamestown. So Jamestown was the first colony that was established by the British. Then we have Georgia, which was the last colony established by the British. And then we have salutary neglect, the Enlightenment, and the First Great Awakening that we have learned about today. And so what you're going to do is you're going to use the website Padlet. You can follow the link on Google Classroom, and you're going to come up here to the top left where it says Make a Padlet. And for this, you want to use the timeline feature. So you're going to go down to where it says timeline. It should be the last one, and click select. And it's going to start a new Padlet. You can change your background. I'm going to put a solid color so you can kind of see a little bit easier, but you can design yours however that you want to. And I'm going to start posting. And so for my first one, I have Jamestown as my title. And then you're going to write something. And what you're going to write on here is you want to tell what this event was. So you're going to explain it. So like with Jamestown, I know it was the first established colony that the British create. But not only are you going to explain it, but you're also going to explain how it helped shape American identity. So, for example, if Jamestown was never established as a colony, we wouldn't have the starting point for British colonization in North America, which eventually leads to more and more colonies that get created. And then as we have more colonies and more time progresses, we have all of these movements that help lead to American identity. So you're going to explain what the event was and then also how it led to American identity. We're doing this as a timeline. We're starting with Jamestown in 1607, which is the earliest one. The First Great Awakening was your latest one in the 1700s. And then on your last event, American identity, it's not a specific event, but it's something that developed. And so on your last one, it would be your last kind of box. Once you get all of your other ones on here, you would just explain how American identity began to form, and then this helped lead to the Revolutionary War. So you'll have Jamestown, and then you'll make another box for the Georgia colony. You'll put your information, and you'll have one for salutary neglect, and so on and so forth. And that way you can kind of see the progression and the change over time of how the colonists go from being British citizens to seeing themselves as American. So I hope that makes sense. Basically what we're doing is, again, we're looking at a change over time. You'll have all of these instructions on Classroom, and we're trying to see how these first 5 events lead up to the 6th thing. So that's why we call it 6 degrees of separation. We're figuring out how we get from the first event to the last thing that happened. If you have questions on this, let me know. I know it can be a little bit confusing, but just think about it as you're creating a timeline with the end goal being to see how American identity emerged in the colonies.